I quote, you said exactly about slavery. Thank God and white people for slavery. That is something white supremacists would say. Why do you feel the need to kowtow to them?
And why is it that I'm kowtowing down to them by saying what I think about it?
You think slavery was a good thing?
Yes.
What? Why?
That's a good question. I think it was good in that those were the times, and it allowed us to be born in America, the greatest country on this side of heaven. We were allowed to be born here rather than sneaking across the borders or having to fill out an application and wait for years or take a test, which we would have never passed, by the way. But take a test, and so rather than, and all cultures have been enslaved in one form or fashion or another, right? And so rather than whimpering and whining and begging, especially the blacks today who don't even know anything about slavery, they have freedom to do what they want. Instead of complaining, I would show my appreciation to the folks who died and sacrificed their lives that I might be born in the greatest country in the world. So even though slavery looked like it was a bad thing, it turned out to be good for us because we could be stuck in Africa somewhere.
But wait, why do you have to liken it to being on a crowded airplane? That's what you said about slave ships. Why do you have to trivialize it?
That's another good question. You know how when the slaves were coming over, and
yes,
they were like right down at the bottom of the boat there, and if you, I don't know if you've ever been on an airplane. When you ride in the back of the plane, it's like riding on a slave ship. The seats are so close together, and they don't feed you anymore back there. I think they're changing that now, but they don't feed you. And you could be sitting next to fat people, people who are musty, haven't bathed or anything like that. And so what we did was we created a slave ship to send the blacks back who are complaining about this country rather than showing them, giving to the country. We created a slave ship, and it's the same type of ship that they came over here on, so that if they want to go back, we'll send them back.
But you do know at least half of the people on the slave ship end up dying. Starvation and disease and stuff like that. It's a little different than an average airplane, don't you think?
Well, nowadays it's possible to die on an airplane. But I do understand that, and that's the reason that I'm living upright as a black American, to show my appreciation to those folks who died on those ships, that I might be here.
It's okay.
Does that make sense? Does that make sense at all?
No, it doesn't. But
so is it better to show your appreciation or to complain the rest of your life?
I'm not a supporter of black people keep on complaining, but I'm saying
which is better, to show your appreciation or to complain?
Nobody's. I'm
asking you a question. I'm not saying you are. Which is better, to show your appreciation or to complain?
I'm not gonna appreciate slavery. No.
And why not?
Because millions of your ancestors.
Okay, so black conservatives have existed in America, and they have followed the American conservative movement to some pretty dark places, particularly during the Reagan administration and the Nixon administration. They peaked, I would say, as a mainstream part of American conservatism during the Tea Party era, through a combination of sort of Reason.com libertarianism stuff, which supposedly deracialized American conservatism and boiled it down to economics, even though, you know, a lot of us would say that so-called American libertarian is the first path to the alt-right, because it takes it's the first kind of layer of coding that leads you into the alt-right, that it makes a bunch of economic arguments based on race. that later cue people up for ideas about inherent inferiority and ideological inferiority of people of color. Okay, so I'm off the topic, but so whatever. Like the Tea Party had Herman Cain running for president and a bunch of, prominent based black people, based black Republicans, and when MAGA proper came along and alt-right came along, for the first time since the early 1960s, the mainstream of American, or at least the mainstream, the base of American conservatism, right? They're not mainstream. They are the base. They are the purest part of American right-wing politics, became openly anti-black, meaning that they didn't even allow black conservatives to bootlick. That's what's special about the alt-right, is that they don't allow bootlickers to get by. So they'll call Dave Rubin the K-bomb and tell him that they're not interested in the J-right, that the Jewish right-wing is also their enemy. You will see them talk about based black people, based transgender people as parasites, which is something that I have in common with them, because I also believe that you should not be a right-wing Jew. You should not be a right-wing transgender person. You should not be a right-wing black person, because you are not acting in your own self-interest or the interest of your group. There is no dividend for black people via conservatism, because black people need progress. Conserving the existing power dynamic fucks black people. It fucks transgender people. It fucks everybody who's not a white man. So what token conservatism is about, and we've got red pill black these days, Candace Owens. So there are still tokens, but they are not considered to be inside the deepest circle of hell when it comes to American right-wing politics. And I would agree with members of the alt-right who say that based black people are not the future of the Republican Party, or based transgender people are not the future of the American right-wing, because they are done with tokens. They are done with dog whistles. The generation that the alt-right represents, because the alt-right is different from other right-wing political movements, in that the alt-right in America and Europe are younger people. They're college kids. They're high school kids. They're disaffected 30-somethings. Whereas most right-wing movements, at least in the United States of America, have been for people like 50 and above, and more usually 65 and above. So the next generation of the American right wing is Nazis proper, full-blown, open bigots who do not allow Uncle Toms into their house. You know what I mean? They don't want dog whistles, and they want to speak for their own hatred. And they don't need somebody like Jesse Lee Peterson, even though Jesse Lee Peterson or that guy T or some black guy or Candace Owens tries to lick that boot so clean. And they may tolerate the more extreme bootlickers a little bit, but in the end, that movement is done with pretending that they like black people if black people would just change their ideology. The alt-right is premised on essentialism. The alt-right is premised upon the idea that Latinos in Central and South America shouldn't come here because they're born communists. It's genetic. That brown skin is a genetic signifier for parasitism. That Africans are born to fail. That they are, and again, these are not new. These are very antiquated ideas that have existed in Western societies, that native peoples in the third world are inherently backwards, that they are subspecies of the white race, and that they cannot They cannot become civilized so that they should be happy under the boot of the white man's civilization, because they're better off being ruled by the white man and his intrinsic civilization. The gene for civilization is in the white man's DNA, which is stupid because Egypt wasn't. I mean, again, it's stupid on the face, but if you just track the history of civilization, Western civilization came long after Eastern civilization. It came long after Asian civilization. It came way after African civilization. You don't have Western civilization without African civilization. You don't have Rome. You don't have Greece. You don't have any of that shit without the empires of Africa. That point being made. Jesse Lee Peterson is an apologist of the most disgusting degree, because many of these based black conservatives, Herman Cain, various other black and brown Tea Partiers, a couple of Latino Republicans as well, did not follow MAGA into full-blown Holocaust denial, did not follow MAGA into open racial nationalism, even though they were, Tea Party tokens were plenty racist, but they wouldn't go into explicit racism. There are a lot of Jewish conservatives who, from the Tea Party and Reagan and neoconservative era, who did not follow or could not follow the alt-right and MAGA into open self-loathing. But apparently Jesse Lee Peterson is stupid enough and self-loathing enough and lacking in self-awareness enough to turn into a slavery apologist. He's getting his talking points mixed up, because he's conflating the old Tea Party talking point about immigrants appreciating getting the opportunity to come to the land of opportunity and participate with slavery, which is not a story of immigrants. It's a story of abducted people being brought to the United States of America, living as unpersons under the state, meaning like the black people who arrived in the United States of America as slaves were not legally classified as people for like 3 generations, like 150 years. It was the American Civil Rights Act in 1964 that legalized black humanity, and in a very limited and shitty way. I don't count the end of slavery as black people becoming fully equal under the law, for obvious reasons, that segregation was still legal based on race, meaning that a black person could still be excluded exclusively on skin color. So it's impossible for people to be separate but equal. There will always be, once you separate people, it's very easy to make them unequal, because you can just, again, define your group, make sure all the fruits of labor and resources of your country just go to the already segregated group. That's how South Africa did it as well. So Jesse Lee Peterson doesn't understand that Africa is not a 100% poor continent. It's like North America. There are massive pockets of poverty. There are massive pockets of prosperity, and that's been true for decades and decades now. So I push back against the myth that black people would have inherently been starving if they had been left on the continent of Africa. I would say even if they were starving on the continent of Africa right now, that they would have been better off not having lost their ethnic identity to slavery. They would have been better off not having lost their, not having endured the horrible generational trauma of slavery. They would have been better off not living in a country where they are still oppressed by the norms established under slavery. So yes, I think that black people who are here now, I'm glad they're here. I'm glad that we have a multicultural multi-ethnic, multiracial society. I've grown up in majority black neighborhoods my whole life. I still live in a majority black neighborhood. But I don't think that Jesse Lee Peterson has a point that black people would have been better off, would have been worse off, and inherently worse off in Africa. Either it was 150 years ago or now. Because again, Africa is not the toilet that dumb people think it is. Next is, he's internalized so many mushy talking points that he really thinks that when he's talking about slaves that he can still use the same triumphalist language about these people sacrificed for me to be here. No, they did not. They were sacrificed. They did not sacrifice for you to be here. They were sacrificed on the altar of American capitalism. And you being here is happenstance from that. Because it could have gone any way, either way. It could have gone that when America freed the slaves, they could have just started a deportation program to send black people back to Africa. And in fact, the alt-right YouTuber Alternative Hypothesis has made that point, that he believes that America would have been better off if they had either executed en masse African slaves when they were freed, or sent them back, started a mass deportation program to send Africans back home. So no, I think the big takeaway here is that someone like Jesse Lee Peterson, who claims to be Christian, will be judged by history far more harshly than white nationalists. Black white nationalists will probably be judged much harder than white nationalists.